so much for joining me today. Very grateful that you said yes. Yes.
Well, I'm happy to share my little bit. Yeah.
So we're here today to talk about centering prayer. And I'm in a group with Siobhan where we meet up once a week to do centering prayer. So I asked Siobhan, I think it's amazing. I'm just saying this for whoever's listening. I think it's amazing for really why I was drawn to it was because of the silence in it. And even though there are a lot of teachings from Father Thomas Keating, I don't think you really necessarily need them. Like, I think the practice of centering prayer is just like enough, and anything else is kind of extra. But one of the reasons why I was drawn to it was just the silence, So even like when I asked you to join, you said you don't really like getting into your head about things, and sometimes non-duality teachings can seem like there's a bit too many words involved, and I totally understand that, and there's many people who would feel like that. So that's why I think centering prayer is amazing, because it's really encouraging us to just be totally silent. I don't know if you'd like to share like maybe what brought you to centering prayer, or you don't have to say that, or even just what it is, just to share with whoever is listening.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit about where I came from and where I come from. I'm a very ordinary housewife, a mother, recently a granny. I was brought up Catholic, and as I said to you before the interview, Amba, I was a just in case Catholic. I just in case. Didn't know anything about having a relationship with God. God was there for me to go to when I was in trouble and to say the odd thank you to. I did go to Mass, brought the kids up Catholic, but really I was only stopped in my tracks and brought to my senses when my mum died in 1994. And that's when I started to think, what's this life all about? It can't be just about the material things. So I was pushed straight away into finding books on prayer. I desperately knew I wanted to see her again, and I wanted to die how she died, with wonderful faith, just letting everything go at the end. I couldn't understand how someone at 72 could go that easily. So yeah, I started prayer courses, and I remember at the end of the first prayer course going up to the person and saying, what now? He'd given me a method, but what now? And he just said, just go and do it. And I tried. I eventually found a really good priest. This is way back in the 90s now still, Father Paddy Cusack, who was a Jesuit, who taught me Ignatian contemplation, which is using my mind and maybe taking a scene in the Bible, or maybe getting into the boat with Jesus and having an imaginary conversation with him. I found that really good. So that was my introduction, getting to know Jesus.
That sounds kind of nice. It sounds kind of almost like a prayer or something.
It is. It's Ignatian. It is prayer. You're there. You sit with Jesus, and it's a form of prayer.
Very real.
Yeah, and definitely you build up a relationship with this, to me, a very kind, compassionate, divine, but very human God. That's what I came to know through that. And that course, actually, I was introduced to what I now know as centering prayer. Father Paddy was an elderly priest, and he started to teach us this method of silent prayer, and where you just would let everything go, let the thoughts go. And yeah, I loved it, but the course ended and I couldn't keep it up. There was definitely a draw there, and a draw for me to go and find out more about it, but I lost it because I had no group to practice with. The course ended. So that stayed, and that we're still way back at the beginning of the 2000s, I would think. We're still, that sort of draw stayed with me. But I went back to my other form of vocal prayer and getting into the boat with Jesus, or watching Jesus on the mountain. I remember once actually sitting and taking a scene from the Bible where they say Jesus went off on his own to pray. And I decided I'd close my eyes and imagine watching him, and found a very contemplative Jesus. And I wondered what his relationship was with his father. For me at that time, God the Father was still to be feared, I'm afraid. The one I grew up with, the one who was looking at me, a bit like a guard. Jesus was something totally different to me. But I remember after that thinking, who is it you were praying to there, Jesus?
Yeah.
And gradually then in the next few years, just began to realize I wanted more silence. Hadn't a clue how to do it. Didn't know. I tried different forms of meditation. I went to Buddhist meditation. There was too much technique involved in those. There was placing your tongue here and concentrating. There's a lot of concentration that I really didn't like. It kept my mind too busy. And then eventually I'm getting there, 2008 is when I found centering prayer. Many years ago, 14 years ago nearly. I just saw an ad, didn't know what it was, silent prayer. And after the first session, I thought, oh, this is what Father Paddy taught me 10 years ago nearly. And I loved it straight away. So what is centering prayer? To know about centering prayer, you need to know just a little bit about contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer is an ancient form of Christian meditation, dating right back to the 3rd and 4th century, to the time of Jesus even. As I said before, I never knew about a relationship with God. To me, it was like I'm going with my list. Now, the relationship was growing up with Jesus, but this prayer is where your relationship with God has got so deep, and it's the God who's within us, the divine. That relationship has got so deep that you're communing with him beyond thoughts, beyond words, beyond emotion. You're sitting with the divine and you're opening yourself up. It's a pure gift. Contemplative prayer is a pure gift. You can't just sit down and do it. And the reason you can't just sit down and do it is because we have the busy mind that's whirling around. And also we have this barrier. There are barriers and behaviors within us that have developed over years that are just preventing us from being aware of this deep divine. And so that's contemplative prayer. Centering prayer is a stepping stone to bring you to that gift of contemplative prayer.
Is centering prayer like, because when you're talking about contemplative prayer, I feel like that is centering prayer, but is centering prayer more like a method that reaches you to contemplative prayer? Because there is a kind of something, like if your mind comes up, you actually kind of do something in a way to come back.
Yeah. Centering prayer is the method. It's one of the stepping stones. When you're in, there's no knowing when you move from centering prayer to contemplative prayer.
Yeah, it's kind of like the means and the end are the same or something, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Centering prayer is a prayer. You might sit for 20 minutes in centering prayer and be in contemplative prayer and not know anything about it for a minute. It's the same. It's just centering prayer. Contemplative prayer is a deeper form. It's prayer beyond thoughts, beyond words, beyond emotions. So certainly when I sit in centering prayer, the thoughts are there, and that's fine. It's a method of prayer.
Yeah.
So centering prayer was developed in the 70s by 3 wonderful monks in America. The main one being Father Thomas Keating, Basil Pennington, and William Menninger are the other two. But Thomas Keating is one that Centering Prayer, Contemplative Outreach Ireland, and Contemplative Outreach follow. They, seeing people walking past their monastery and going up to the local Buddhist center or whatever to learn to meditate, thought to themselves, hey, we have that. The problem is we had that form of prayer for centuries, but it got lost in around the 16th century. People started to use their minds more in prayer, as Christians did. So obviously Thomas Keating, these 3 monks are Trappist monks, and they have been doing that form of prayer since they entered the monastery, I presume, and they're all dead actually, but they were in their mid-70s when they started this. They just devised a method. They said, we know how to do this prayer. Let's teach the Christians. Initially, they were teaching priests, nuns, and they've spread it out. And so it's now being prayed by everybody and anybody around the world to learn this method. Yeah. A very simple method of prayer. And that's how they came up with a method. And Thomas Keating set up Contemplative Outreach in America, which is an organization. The whole aim of it is to spread this form of prayer and to show that there is this form of Christian prayer out there. So that's where, so the monks then they developed the method and spread it out. So as a form of, it's also based on an ancient book, or a book from the 14th century called The Cloud of Unknowing. And this was written by an unknown author in England. They think it was a monk writing to his student. It could have been a woman, but I've heard more recently that it's written in very masculine form, and it is. So it's written, and it's a very, very practical book, and really, in detail how to do this prayer and how to deal with your thoughts. It's also based, it goes right back to the time of Jesus, when Jesus was asked by his disciples, how should we pray? In Matthew 6:6, he says, if you want to pray, go to your inner room, shut the door, and pray to your Father in secret, or your Abba in secret. And the Father who sees you in secret will reward you. Even the first sentence, if you want to pray, that means not the way I used to pray. If you want to go with your grocery list to God, if you want to pray, if you want to deepen that relationship with God, go to your inner room. In Jesus's time, there were no big fancy houses, so the inner room referred to the room of the heart. Go to your inner room, go inside. Shut the door or in some translations it says bolt the door, and that's a reference to letting go of your thoughts. Close your eyes, let your thoughts go. No need to get rid of them, just let go of your thoughts and pray to your Abba in secret. And this is the God who dwells within us, the divine indwelling. Again, I grew up with the term, or being told that I was the temple of the Holy Spirit. I find that a very cold, it was a scary thing for me to think that I was the temple of the Holy Spirit. So I had to be pure and clean. And whereas the divine indwelling to me says it all. It's somebody kind, compassionate. So pray to your Abba in secret, and your Abba who sees in secret will reward you. And the reward is that you get to know him, her. I refer to God, the divine indwelling. Usually it's him. It's not that I see God as a him, it's just I have to use something. I actually see him with a very compassionate mother's heart.
So, and the reward is like that we feel him right here. Because especially maybe in lots of religions, but in Christianity, it's kind of like that God is out there or up there or like somewhere outside of us, So like when we go to our inner room, that's what we find is like that actually God is right here in our heart. And that's like the best reward, isn't it? That's a good one.
So do I want to read at this stage?
I just wanted to say something just for clarification, even though I think you've said it, but just saying it. Like, because it can kind of sound almost like a doing, like so that I'm going to sit down and pray, and specifically in Christianity, like often prayer is like that you're reciting something, like Hail Mary, or I don't know, saying some kind of prayer, you're saying something. But I experience, and you say now if it's different, but really centering prayer, and this is one of the reasons why I was very drawn to it, is really that you're not doing anything. It's an opportunity for you to leave aside everything. So it's an opportunity to actually leave aside everything and not do anything. So even though it's called prayer, we're not praying for something or asking for anything. And I love when you described, and maybe you'd say, when you say like when you're doing centering prayer, like even if the image of Jesus appears to you, that's also a thought. Like anything of the senses, like an itch, you have an itch on your leg, that can be considered a thought. And it's just like this is not the time for that. Our time of centering prayer is to just, it's like almost like a time of rest, and it's a time to just be, and we're not even waiting for anything or wanting anything. And if we feel the sense of wanting something, that's also a thought. So it's not the time for that, like just in this 20 minutes or however much you decide to do. So even though it's called prayer, which we often maybe might associate with doing something, this type of prayer is really not doing anything.
Exactly what you've said. Yes, so I'm back in the inner room right before I go go into the floor.
Yeah.
So who do we meet in the inner room? As I said, this the Abba. I love the image of God as the father and the prodigal son story in the Bible. In Luke's gospel, where the father has two sons, and one asks for his share of the money, the younger son, and goes off and spends it all and has a great life. And of course, there's loads of friends until the money runs out, and then he comes to his senses. And the line that I love is, so the father has been obviously waiting for the son to come back. It's while he was still a long way off, the father saw him coming, ran to greet him and embraced him. And that, to me, is the God that meets me in my inner room. It's no matter what state I come in, and I'm usually rushing in to sit down and do my half hour. I'm here, and he's just there, ready to embrace me. So it's, to me, that's a beautiful image. But I was going to read just a little bit of from Open Mind, Open Heart, which is one of Thomas Keating's books. And he talks about, so we're in the inner room. And it says, we surrender to the attraction of interior silence, tranquility, and peace. We do not try to feel anything, reflect about anything. Without effort, without trying, we sink into this presence, letting everything else go by. Let love alone speak. This presence is immense, yet so humble, awe-inspiring, yet so gentle, limitless, yet so intimate, tender, and personal. I know that I am known. Everything in my life is transparent in this presence. It knows everything about me, all my weakness, brokenness, sinfulness, and still loves me infinitely. This presence is healing, strengthening, refreshing. It is non-judgmental, self-giving, seeking no reward, boundless in compassion. It's like coming home to a place I never should have left, to an awareness that was somehow always there, but which I did not recognize. I cannot force this awareness or bring it about. A door opens within me, but from the other side. We wait patiently in silence, openness, and quiet attentiveness, motionless within and without. We surrender to the attraction to be still, to be loved, just to be. So with this prayer, we come to know God experientially and with a heart knowledge, not a head knowledge. And I suppose up to me finding centering prayer, and even until recently, that God I knew was very much in my head. But you come to know the God in the heart.
Yeah.
So that's from a Thomas Keating book. So I suppose the method is really, I'll speak a little bit about it, will I?
Yeah, that would be good, because I think it's very kind of practical, and to hear about how it's done, you could say it's like anyone can just start it right now. Like
yeah. When I went to my first class, we were told, go home now and start practicing, and I loved it right from the beginning. I loved it. So as I say, Thomas Keating, Basil Pennington, and William Menninger came up with 4 very simple guidelines. The first thing to say about the prayer is it's a prayer of intention. And the thing is, you're intending to sit with the divine within for the next 20 minutes, let's say. So it's a prayer of intention. And once you sit down and have that intention in action, you're in prayer.
Yeah.
And your mind is going to go all over the place. It doesn't matter. Your intention is to be there.
Yeah.
So it's a prayer of intention and a prayer of consent, because you're consenting to this God within. You're consenting to God's presence and action within. And the action bit is important. I'll talk about that later. But because action, things happen in life as we do this prayer. So the first guideline is you choose a word, and we call it a sacred word. It can be anything. It can be your word for God. It can be peace, love, but a short word. Choose a word as a symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within.
Mm-hmm.
So you select a word. Second guideline is sitting comfortably, eyes closed, feet on the ground, the usual way, hands on your knees perhaps, and sitting straight.
Mm-hmm.
Sit and you silently introduce the sacred word.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say that word, what you're saying, my word is peace, I say peace. What I'm actually saying is, okay, here I am now, God, for the next 20 minutes. I'm here with intention. I want to be here. I consent to your presence and action within me.
Yeah.
Third guideline, when thoughts arise, and thoughts obviously do arise, you return ever so gently to the sacred word. I'll come back to that. And then the fourth one is at the end of the prayer time, sit quietly for a moment or two in prayer, or just sit. Somebody told a story that it's like when you do something in a microwave for 15 minutes and they say to let it rest for the next minute because things still happen and those loud. So it really is just to sit and bring yourself quietly back to the world again. Another thing to say about the form of prayers, we don't, you mentioned about prayer, it's not your typical wordy prayer, obviously it's not, but it's not a time to pray for other people. It's a time to sit and open yourself to God. I suppose I spent so many years doing the vocal prayers for all God, I'd say, God's sake of hearing me. It's a time for God. It's a time for you to be silent. They say God's first language is silence. And so the God who's hidden within just can't communicate anything really to us except in silence. And if we think we know God, we don't. If you think you've got him in a nutshell, you don't, because anything you think God is not. You know,
purely just because you think it, because thinking is an idea.
yeah.
And that's not where God lives.
Yeah. You have your word as your symbol of your intention to consent. You sit as the thoughts arise, and the thoughts do arise. And as you said earlier, Amba, a thought can be anything from a memory, internal dialogue, an emotion, self-reflection. You know, you're there saying, oh, this is lovely, you know, let it go. A sense perception, an itch, a scratch, anything like that is a thought. You could get an image of when you think is God walking towards you. You just let it go. So the third guideline, when engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to your sacred word. There's a difference between being engaged with your thoughts and having a thought. I mean, thoughts are always there. Thomas Keating refers to them as being like clouds in the sky or boats on the river. And you're sitting on the river's side, maybe feet dipping in the water, and that's where you want to be, and boats are going by. If you let them go by, they'll go by. But if you decide to jump on board one, that's where you're engaged. You've grabbed the thought.
And it can be like a habit for us, you know, like even when we're sitting in centering prayer, like you're sitting with that intention, and maybe for a while it's very quiet, and then just almost like an energetic thing, like our attention can get totally pulled into thought, you know, and then maybe we've been like totally engaged with thought for like a minute before even that we recognize that you've been totally engaged, because it's such a habit for us. And then like as soon as we notice, like it's not that we have to beat ourselves up for being engaged for like the last minute, it's just like to just come back to the word. You just say the word, and that's kind of reaffirming our intention that this is what I'm committed to in this time. I'm here to be silent. That's it.
Yeah. There's no beating up. There's no, at the end of the 20 minutes, you might think, oh, holy God, you know, that was just awful. All I did was turn to the word. But Thomas Keating says, every time you return to the word, you're returning to your divine within. So if you've do it 1,000 times, isn't it lovely? You've returned to your word. You've returned to the divine within. And there's no assessing the prayer at the end. You just get up and get on with your day. There's no, great, that was not great. You don't know what has gone on inside. You have opened yourself to God's presence and action. So God is working on us, whether we know it or not. You don't know what's gone on, is what I'm saying. You just get up and go on with your day.
And we literally don't know how to assess. Because even if some kind of assessing happened, it would just be more thoughts.
Yeah, so
Isn't it?
just no assessing.
Exactly.
And he also compares like the thoughts. He talks about music and so just basically to learn to let the thoughts go.
Yeah.
You know, they're there. They are there. Just let them go. He said it's sometimes it's like if you're in a supermarket shopping and there's music playing in the background. You're there to get your groceries. Music's there. When you come out of the supermarket, if someone says, "What was playing in there?" chances are you'll say, "I haven't a clue. It was there." It's so similar to that. Just let it go, and they'll keep going. The work that goes on, I said earlier that we can't just do contemplative prayer, which is the deeper part of centering prayer, where we're praying beyond thoughts.
That's when we're really, or what I'm taking from that when you say it, is that's when we're really become more kind of quiet and silent, and thoughts aren't really appearing, or they're really not, we're not getting engaged with them at all, but you can really feel the presence in your being.
I don't know. Again, if you're feeling your presence, maybe that's a thought. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
it's not like, because your presence is here if you're alive, otherwise you wouldn't be conscious. So I'm really clear about that like our presence is here, and it's not a thought. Like,
and I thought you meant you're feeling God's presence, or
well, if you're thinking it's God's presence, if there's thoughts about like even whose presence it is, then there's thoughts present. But literally when you're just present, God is here, but you're not thinking it in those moments, but there is, like what you read at the beginning, I don't know if you'd read it again, but you said something like about knowing, like that knowing is very clear or something like that. When you were saying something about contemplative prayer. So, because that presence is kind of knowing itself. You can read it again if you have it there.
What was it? The extract from?
It was something about contemplative prayer that you read.
No, the only thing I've read is from Open Mind, Open Heart.
Okay. It was something at the very beginning, and there was something about kind of when you're just silent, then knowingness is just here. Something, he said something like that.
I can't remember what I said there. Contemplative, what I said of contemplative prayer is that it's prayer beyond thoughts, beyond words, beyond. So going back to, I was saying we can't just sit and do contemplative prayer because of our busy mind. So the method of the prayer, centering prayer, helps us deal with that. But also because we have these barriers, we're little bundles of emotions inside, and these barriers prevent us from drawing close to the divine within. And so during the practice of centering prayer, these barriers get dealt with by the divine. And these are just behaviors that we've built from early childhood, from when our basic needs, our needs for safety and our needs for love and affection, our needs for power and control, weren't dealt with properly by our parents. And it's not that we were abused in any way, but no parent can be a perfect 100% their parent. So when these little needs, and some of them obviously may have been a lot bigger, but when even our smaller needs aren't dealt with as children, we build these compensatory behaviors. So we start to stamp our feet, or we'll, beat someone up, or depending on the character sort of person you are. And then that's all very well, but until you come to adulthood and you're still doing these things, you're still stomping out of the office, or you're still demanding for staff to do. And these are behaviors that are within us that are obviously not very attractive. And it's by practicing this prayer, they become noticed by you.
Yeah.
I never set out to, and Thomas calls these our emotional programs for happiness. And once this prayer happens, once we're doing this prayer, those emotional programs begin to become dismantled.
Yeah.
Now, I never dismantle my emotional program for happiness. If you told me that in 2008, I left, I think, because I thought, no, there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
But you begin to see yourself as you practice this prayer regularly. And he does say every day for 20 minutes, twice a day.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and there's a reason for it. Because it's the work is continuously happening. And so you just begin to see yourself in a different way. You also realize that you're loved exactly as you are, which is
because it's kind of cultivating our awareness or something, isn't it? You know, like, so all of that, like, emotional programs for happiness are kind of the way our mind works and the way we usually relate in the world when we're not into prayer or meditation or anything. So like by choosing to do centering prayer, we're actually stepping into the more kind of just silent part of ourselves. So we're not kind of feeding that anymore. So usually we'd be totally kind of engaged and feeding those emotional programs for happiness, but we're just kind of choosing to step back a little bit so we can become a bit more aware. And if we're not feeding them, then they can't continue because they're not really needed anymore. Like the way I think you just said that as well. Like
Thomas says that our behaviors and our emotions are like interlocking cogs. And so someone presses your button and your behaviors and your emotions just go off into orbit, and the little tape in the head goes off, and on it goes. And through the practice of this prayer, and because during the prayer we let go of our thoughts, it's not a pushing them away, it's a very gentle let go of our thoughts. That letting go starts to spill over into our everyday life. I think that's the first thing I noticed, and they're only little things, but just letting go. And so we begin to let go of those silly old tapes in the head, and it without really having to. I'm not saying I should do this. I'm now saying I want to do this because God accepts me exactly as I am, which is quite incredible. You know, back to the prodigal son coming home and the father there waiting, and that's the God who accepts you exactly as you are. And so in the past I would have had made a list up during Lent of all the things I should do, and were impossible, and they were I hated, you know, whereas now certainly nowhere near sainthood. But letting go very gently. It's all the centering prayer process and the centering prayer, what happens is really gentle. Certainly for me, I have met a really gentle God who knows me better than I know myself. Knows that I'll get stressed and so I'm cajoled along.
I really have to say that I like that. I don't know what words to put, but a few things like the wholeness of centering prayer, that it's not totally focused on, well, it kind of is, but like some spirituality is totally focused on only looking towards God, and there's no talk about the emotional programs for happiness or our kind of life stuff. And that like it is important that gets somehow dismantled, because if it doesn't, then we just keep going back to it all the time because it's such a bad habit, you know. And also that's one thing. And the other thing is, like you said, like that there's kind of like no rush, like you're meeting a really gentle God. Like, and I feel like centering prayer, it's not like in some spiritualities, you know, it's like we need to look towards this inner God in our heart and just kind of push everything aside, and almost like a rush to recognize this God, and that's everything, you know. And I feel like this approach like of centering prayer is just so gentle and loving and all inclusive and embracing, and there's no need to push everything aside, but just acknowledge that it's just happening by itself. And of course we couldn't do it anyway, and also acknowledging that, but like through our choosing to sit in centering prayer for like 20 minutes twice a day, or whenever we do or whenever we can, that it's just we're just kind of open to whatever God decides should happen. So if God wants to keep our emotional programs for happiness, that's okay. It's not up for us to say if it's time for it to go or not, you know. But just like we're kind of, it's really like it's like a total like surrendering, and a very soft kind of surrendering, like the way you said, like you meet a very gentle God. Like there's no what's the word, kind of manipulation or rush or force or anything like that. It's so just quiet and peaceful and at our own pace. And I just love the inclusivity of it, like includes kind of all of life.
Yeah. Two things. I suppose, I'll have to remember the second one. But the first thing you said about the psychology, that's what I loved as well. And not that I'm big into psychology, but I love the fact that Thomas Keating took psychology, on board. It isn't just, as you say, a prayer. And he
Like it's
went,
acknowledged.
so psychology and science would have been big into. And the unconscious, as he said, we've only known about it for 100 years. But just that whole unloading of the unconscious, as he said. I loved that. The other thing is you're saying it's I don't know what word you used, but the word that came to me was effortlessness. That's to me what centering prayer is. It's effortlessness. The problem is I try to be effortless when I'm doing it sometimes, but it's just, it is things. It just happen. You sit, vent, and intention, and let it all happen. And it's not like, I remember being on a retreat once and somebody saying to me, I didn't sign up, because we were watching a DVD of Thomas Keating and he was talking about this unloading of the unconscious, as he called it. And this girl said to me, I didn't sign up for this, I just want to pray. And, I said, well, I didn't initially either, but I can see it happening in me now. And certainly nothing terrible has erupted. And I think God won't show you anything that you're not able for.
And I just want to say as well, like, even though it's from the Christian tradition, I suppose, like, I grew up in Ireland, so I probably have that in my being as well. But I don't feel like you would really have to be into Christianity at all to appreciate it and to enjoy it, like, because I don't think you'd have to, sometimes in our meetings at least, we might read like Psalms, but Psalms aren't particularly Christian anyway. I don't think, but we might read Psalms, or we might mention some kind of Christian things, but I don't know. I don't think it really, I think it's more about the silence and just like your commitment to silence, really. It's like that sitting is a commitment to silence and a commitment to yourself, and an opportunity, like you said, an opportunity to recognize all those false things that we've been buying into for so long. But for this time, we're choosing, okay, I'm not going to buy into that. I'm going to be in my inner room. So it's, even though it is in the Christian tradition, you don't have to be into Christianity.
No. As I said in the very beginning, Thomas Keating developed the method to help priests, nuns, religious, and then spread it out. And one of his final DVDs I'd seen on retreat, he really said, to have a higher being is, you're praying to, or you're connecting with something, your spark within, even that. But
there has to be some.
I think you'd have to believe in.
There might have to be some kind of openness, like it's like my teacher says as well, like the kind of fundamental thing that's needed if you come to satsang, he says, is an openness. And what that means is like just to be open to the possibility that you are something beyond your mind and your stories. So it's a very similar thing, like to just be open that there's something else here that maybe we haven't considered. It can be any kind of openness at all.
Like he does say, it's not a technique, because if it's a technique, you're looking for something. You're looking to improve something in you, or, it's definitely not a technique. It's not something that it's not a relaxation method. Not, it is a prayer. In Christ, we and I like to call it prayer as opposed to meditation, because to me it is prayer. But meditation it is too.
Prayer feels nice, though. It kind of has a different quality, doesn't it? And it almost, just to even call it that, it feels connected with the heart already somehow.
Yeah. And as I said earlier, it's not a time to pray for others, but certainly if someone will say to me, oh, so-and-so is ill, or will you pray for them? They're already in my prayer. It's there. I sit down, they're there. And even though I'm not calling them to mind, but I brought them to the inner room. And I suppose that last minute at the end where you sit in silence, that's when I will call that person to mind. But only for that minute. So it really is a prayer of like initially we sit in consent, and then that consent turns to surrender.
Yeah.
And then eventually it leads to our transformation. And as Christians, we're called to transformation into Christ, which I think is quite amazing. The quote that I love is, I have it written down because we as mirrors reflect the glory of God, are being transformed into the image we reflect. So we're a mirror reflecting his glory, and we're being transformed into that. So we're not God, but we're not God.
Yeah.
We're not separate. The big thing, we're not separate. I always saw myself as separate until I started working on the relationship. We're not God, and that's not, I mean, I learned that through Anthony de Mello anyway, before I found, but that whole notion of the ocean and the wave.
Yeah. But that's a huge thing, like, to experientially feel, because that's where I feel like, at least that's where all our pain and suffering is, really. Definitely. Is that in the belief of being separate from God, really.
Yeah.
Like that's what it comes back to.
Yeah. It's huge. And with the prayer, we just begin to trust more and more, accept what is. Everything is happening for the greater good. Even in tragedy, I'm blessed in that I haven't been struck by huge tragedy yet. So it's maybe easy for me to say that everything is as it should be. And it's,
I love what you said. You said, I'm not God, but I'm not God.
I'm possibly getting phone calls about that. But no.
But of course someone will have an argument with it, but there'll always be someone who has an argument, but it's true.
No, but there's a fine spark in me. So there's a part of God. That's the bit I'm connecting to.
Yeah.
In the beginning I said I was Siobhan, and I was mother and a granny and a wife.
And you're all that as well. You're all that as well. You're more than that also.
The spark that's going to go on and on.
Yeah.
The spark that was there beforehand. And it's very exciting.
It is. It is very exciting. And that's what these kind of conversations are for, is to just reconnect to that inner spark, and to inspire us to stay. I always feel like if I'm talking to anyone, like to just nourish that spark in us in any way that we can. Like, so that spark is there in all of us, and maybe we have different ways of nourishing it. But I feel like centering prayer is like a really super duper great way. Yeah. So I don't know about contemplative outreach much. You might know more. So
well, there's a website.
Yeah, is it all over the world? Contemplative outreach?
Yeah, it started in America and it spread to Europe. It is in quite a number of countries around the world. Its basic aim is to spread the method of centering prayer. And we run retreats, which I didn't even mention that really, by going on the retreats, that's where I really deepened my relationship, because you're there for 7-8 days and immersed in silence, which is the best. People look at me and say, how do you do that? I skip. I love it. And it is. And when you experience silence, it is the best. So Contemplative Outreach, we have a website in Ireland, Contemplative Outreach Ireland.ie, or just COI.ie. Maybe you'll add that to your notes. So and there are prayer groups, our centering prayer groups. We're lucky. We have lots in Dublin, but they're all around Ireland. And
that's what I was wondering. Do you think that we're very lucky? Because when I looked up centering prayer groups, there seem to be so many, like close.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't know if it'll be like that for everyone. But there's every chance it might be. No.
Well, I update the website, and quite a few have gone during COVID, which is a pity. But they are around the country, and just keep an eye on the website.
I'm thinking of people in other places in the world as well, because I don't know how many Irish people listen to this.
Yeah, if they look up contemplativeoutreach.org, that'll bring them to the American website, and they might start more there. So,
And one thing I wanted to say, when I came to centering prayer, I discovered it actually just when Thomas Keating died. So I think he died in, you'll know, sometime maybe October or November in
2018, yeah.
2018. So only when he passed away, then I started to discover what is centering prayer. And somewhere in my being, I just wanted to be with people who loved God. And then this appeared to me, and I went to the groups, and I really feel like I found that. Like I feel like the groups that I've been to, I've been to 2 different groups and you're in both of them, but I feel like to just be in that presence. So of course, to do the centering prayer in the presence of people who really, I feel like they just really mean it. Everyone who goes there, I feel like they really mean it. It's not like it's just an idea in their head or something. Like people they really mean it, and they love God. And I feel like I'm going and sitting with, like, what Indians call sages, or like the Buddhists would call, enlightened Zen masters or something. That's how I feel like I'm sitting in a group of people like that, and that's just like a great blessing. And really what it just means is I'm sitting with people in silence, and that's what that silence is, like, so each one is like connecting to that silence within, and to be in a group of that is like, that in itself is amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was saying when I was with Father Paddy way back, and I dipped my toe into what I now know as centering prayer, I couldn't pick it up, because to sit at home, if I had, if I was practicing this on my own, I know I'd have given it up. I feel like because I'd be thinking I'm doing it wrong, because it can't be prayer. But yeah, I'm involved in 3 different groups in Dublin, and sitting there and you get such encouragement, and we're all at the same level. There's no,
I love that as I love that there's no hierarchy,
no structure. That's what I love.
I love that you don't find that a lot in spirituality. I haven't found it a lot, but there's no hierarchy, and everyone is, I think that gives a kind of an openness to everybody to really speak from their heart, and to feel like we're really all equal, and that's the case everywhere, really. But often people don't feel like that when they go and meet, let's say, someone who's presenting as a spiritual teacher or something. People maybe just put themselves in a position as a student, but in these kind of meetings where really the silence is the teacher, and that's within all of us. So therefore there's no hierarchy, and that's kind of precious, I feel, as that.
And I'm glad you said that, a teacher bit. I meant to say in the very beginning, I am not a teacher. I am somebody who loves this prayer and who can see the effect it has had on my life the last 14 years. I have little or no training in it, but it's a heart thing. It's a heart. There's one other quote just at the very opening paragraph of Open Mind, Open Heart, where it says, contemplative prayer is the world in which God can do anything. To move into that realm is the greatest adventure. It is to be open to the infinite, and hence to infinite possibilities. Our private self-made worlds come to an end. A new world appears within and around us, and the impossible becomes an everyday experience. And really, silence is the only answer.
I think that's a good place to end. Silence is the only answer. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we finish?
No, I think that's it, really. I just wanted to share the method, give the background, and say that does change us, not, certainly in my case, not in huge ways, but in very gentle ways. And I think the whole notion that you're accepted just as you are, and loved just as you are. And I go back to the prodigal father again, just holding me, and that's who I meet twice a day. Sure.
Yeah.
Why would you not?
Yeah. And committing like twice a day, I feel like it can't really only stay twice a day. You know, like maybe that official practice of sitting on a chair is there twice a day, but at least I feel like it touches our lives at many other times throughout the day. Like we become just kind of more aware, and that silence or that love, you know, kind of you just start to kind of notice it more. Like maybe you don't just jump into the story of your mind straight away, like when it appears, or also we're more kind of loving and accepting of our humanity.
And other people's, more importantly, other people's.
And other people's as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing about centering prayer. I'm sure somebody who listens to it will get something from it at some point in time. Who knows? That's not up to us.
Yeah, no, the website is the place to go. COI.ie is the Irish one. Contemplative Outreach.org is the American one.
Yeah.
And so you get a whole thing on the method of the prayer, books, that sort of thing. But it's certainly on the Irish one, the retreats we have around Ireland, because they are wonderful to go and do a weekend initially, a day even of silence, and then a weekend, and then expand it out. They are great. But the 20 minutes once a day is for maintenance, twice a day is for transformation, according to Thomas Keaton. So.
Thank you, Siobhan.
You're welcome.
And I'll see you tomorrow at our Centering Prayer Group.
Yeah.
See you there.
See you. Thanks, Amba.
Okay. Thanks, Siobhan.